A sudden, piercing alarm shattered the quiet hum of the alien classroom, drawing every student's attention to the holographic emergency alert projected overhead. The display flickered briefly before stabilizing, its crimson hue casting an ominous glow across the amphitheater. The message on the alert, "Emergency Response Protocols, Deathworlder Techniques," sent a ripple of unease through the students, their nervous glances now laced with apprehension. This was no ordinary lecture. At the center of the amphitheater, a holographic display of a galactic standard humanoid anatomy shimmered, a tool crucial for bridging the vast differences between species. For humans, however, such models barely scratched the surface of their physiological complexities, shaped by the relentless demands of a death world. For most of the class, this was another routine session in their xenobiology studies. But today was different. Today, a human had been invited to demonstrate Earth's first aid methods, a topic of curiosity, skepticism, and for some, outright dread. Serox, a slender Aequian with translucent blue skin, leaned toward her classmate Kvar, a hulking Vren with an armored hide, her frills trembling with unease. "Do you think they're as dangerous as they say?" she whispered, her melodic trill carrying a note of apprehension. Kvar's mandibles clicked in quiet contemplation before he replied, "Dangerous, yes. But perhaps also ingenious. We shall see. I've heard rumors about humans," she whispered, her voice a melodic trill. "They're from a Class 12 death world. Their methods are said to be extreme." Kvar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "If they can survive such a harsh world, their techniques must be effective. But extreme? We shall see." The doors slid open and Lieutenant Commander Rachel Carter strode in with a purposeful gait. She wore the standard black and blue uniform of the United Terran Navy, her expression a mix of professionalism and subtle amusement. Behind her was a hover gurney carrying a humanoid practice dummy, its synthetic skin programmed to simulate various injuries. "Good day, students," Carter said, her voice calm but commanding, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who had witnessed Earth's harsh conditions and mastered the unorthodox methods that turned survival into an art form. "I'm here to give you an introduction to Earth's approach to emergency medical care. Some of what I'll show you may seem unorthodox, but I assure you, every technique has been rigorously tested and proven effective." A faint ripple of unease passed through the class. The students had heard tales of human resilience and their bizarre willingness to endure pain and danger to achieve their goals. Carter, aware of the tension, smiled faintly. "Let's begin with a common scenario, a severe hemorrhage," she said. With a few taps on a control panel, the practice dummy displayed a deep laceration on its thigh, bright red synthetic blood oozing from the wound. Serox's frills quivered in alarm. "That's a fatal injury. Surely the patient would require immediate sedation and surgical intervention." Carter nodded. "In ideal conditions, yes. But in the field, time and resources are limited. Here's what we do." She retrieved a compact device from her medkit, a human invention called a tourniquet. Sliding it above the wound, she tightened it with swift precision, cutting off the flow of synthetic blood. Step 1, stop the bleeding. A tourniquet is fast, effective, and can save lives. The Aequian's eyes widened. "You restrict circulation? But what about tissue damage?" "That's a risk we're willing to take," Carter replied evenly. "Dead tissue can be treated. Death from blood loss? Not so much." Kvar's deep voice rumbled. "Efficient. Brutal but efficient." Carter moved on to the next demonstration. She pulled a small, cylindrical device from her kit and pressed it against the dummy's chest, mimicking a tension pneumothorax, a life-threatening buildup of air in the chest cavity. With a sharp motion, she drove the needle into the simulation. The audible hiss as air escaped drew gasps from the students. "Chest decompression," Carter explained. "It's not pretty and it's not painless. But it works. You humans, you puncture your own thoracic cavities?" Serox's tone was incredulous. "How do your patients endure such barbarism?" Carter's expression softened. "Endurance is one of humanity's defining traits. Pain is just another challenge to overcome when survival is on the line." As the demonstrations continued, the room's atmosphere shifted from skepticism to fascination. Carter showcased the use of improvised splints, emergency sutures performed under battlefield conditions, and even a process known as manual CPR, which involved physically compressing the chest to circulate blood during cardiac arrest. The students were both horrified and awed. Each technique was a stark reminder of humanity's resilience and ingenuity. For beings accustomed to advanced medical pods and nanotech, the sight of someone using their bare hands and simple tools to save lives was almost incomprehensible. By the time Carter concluded her lecture, The class sat in stunned silence, their frills, mandibles, and appendages frozen in a mixture of awe and disbelief. Serox's translucent frills drooped, her mind racing with visions of humans calmly enduring what her species would call unbearable agony. Kvaris' mandibles twitched as he grappled with the realization that brute strength was no match for sheer adaptability and resolve. The sheer audacity and grit of human tactics left the students questioning not just Earth's methods but their own deeply ingrained assumptions about survival and what it truly meant to endure. "Any questions?" she asked, scanning the room. Serox tentatively raised a delicate appendage. "Lieutenant Carter, does it not frighten you? The risks, the pain, the crudeness of your methods?" Carter smiled. "It does. But fear isn't an excuse to give up. It's a reason to act. Our methods may seem crude to you, but on Earth, survival often depends on doing whatever it takes." Kvaris' mandibles clicked again, a sign of deep thought. "Your techniques reveal much about your species, Lieutenant. Humans are not merely survivors. You are warriors against death itself." The human's smile widened. "I'll take that as a compliment." As the students filed out of the lecture hall, whispers filled the air. Humanity, the so-called Deathworlders, had once again proven their reputation for defying the odds. For many of the students, this lesson would not soon be forgotten. For others, it was a sobering reminder of what it meant to face life's greatest challenges head-on, the human way. The lecture hall's atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. What had begun as a routine exercise in xenobiology now felt like a revelation, a confrontation with the sheer audacity of human resilience. As the students filed back to their seats for the second half of the session, a palpable tension lingered in the air. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Carter scanned the room, noting the mix of reactions. Serox's frills quivered as if caught in a gentle current, betraying her unease, while Kvaris' mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sign of intense focus. Others fidgeted nervously or exchanged quiet glances, their bioluminescent patches dimming in uncertainty. Each reaction painted a vivid portrait of their inner turmoil. Serox's frills were still visibly trembling, while Kvar sat upright, his mandibles clicking in what she guessed was a gesture of contemplation. The rest of the class, a vibrant mix of species with scales, feathers, and bioluminescent patches, watched her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to unease. "Perfect. Now that we've covered some basic techniques," Carter began, her voice steady, "I'd like to discuss a more advanced scenario. One that requires not just physical intervention but also mental resilience." With a few taps on the control panel, the holographic display shifted, this time showing a battlefield simulation. Smoke billowed from burning vehicles, carrying the acrid stench of scorched metal and fuel. The cries of wounded soldiers echoed faintly through the speakers, mingling with the imagined metallic tang of blood that seemed to permeate the air. The humanoid practice dummy was now sprawled on the ground, synthetic blood pooling beneath a simulated shrapnel wound in its abdomen. "You're in the middle of a combat zone," Carter said, stepping forward. "You're pinned down, resources are limited, and your patient is critical. What do you do?" The room was silent. Even the normally assertive Kvar seemed hesitant to speak. Finally, a student from the back, a feathered Evrexian with vibrant orange plumage, raised a wing. "We would call for extraction," they chirped. "Evacuate the injured to a medical facility?" Carter nodded. "A sound approach. But what if extraction isn't possible? What if you're the only one standing between this person and death?" The Evrexian's feathers ruffled and they lowered their wing. Carter's gaze swept the room, letting the weight of the scenario settle over the students. Then, without warning, she knelt beside the dummy, pulling a compact field kit from her belt. "Here's what we do," she said, her voice calm but urgent. She demonstrated step by step, narrating her actions. "First, assess the wound quickly and carefully. This shrapnel's deep, so removing it now would cause catastrophic bleeding. Instead, we stabilize it immediately to prevent further damage." She applied a quick seal foam, a human invention designed to temporarily seal major wounds. The students murmured, impressed by its simplicity. But Carter wasn't finished. "Next we address shock. The patient's vitals are crashing." She reached for an auto-injector, explaining its purpose as she administered a dose of synthetic adrenaline. "This buys us time. Not much, but sometimes seconds are all we need." Serox's voice broke the tension. "You're saying you would do all this while under fire? That's reckless." Carter looked up, meeting the Aquian's wide, translucent eyes. "Reckless? Perhaps. But on Earth, recklessness is often a necessity. Survival doesn't wait for ideal conditions." The murmurs grew louder. Carter stood, addressing the class with a firm tone. These techniques are not about elegance. They're about doing whatever it takes. Humanity's history is one of constant adversity, plagues, wars, disasters. We've learned to adapt because failure means extinction. Kvar's deep voice rumbled, cutting through the noise. Adversity forged your people. Your methods reflect that? Carter nodded. Exactly. And while our ways may seem crude or even barbaric to you, they are the reason I'm standing here today. And the reason billions of humans are alive. She turned back to the holographic display which now showed a human heart beating steadily. But our methods are not just about survival. They're about protecting what matters. Family, friends, comrades. That's why we fight. That's why we endure. The room fell silent again, but this time the tension had shifted. It wasn't unease anymore, it was respect. Carter saw it in the students' eyes, in the way they leaned forward, their postures attentive. The initial skepticism had given way to understanding. Now, she said, breaking the silence, who's ready to try? Serox's frills quivered again, her translucent skin faintly glowing with a mix of hesitation and determination. Kvar's mandibles clicked twice before he shifted forward, his massive hands slowly raising in acceptance. Around the room, bioluminescent patches flickered nervously, yet a few students leaned in, their resolve hardening as curiosity and respect began to override their fear. The lights dimmed, and a new simulation illuminated the room. This time, the holographic display featured a sprawling starship interior, its walls vibrating with the sound of distant explosions. The acrid tang of burning metal filled the simulated air, and emergency lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the chaotic scene. Emergency lights flashed red as the ship shuddered under an unseen barrage, and the disembodied voice of the simulation's AI called out warnings in clipped, urgent tones. Carter turned to the class, her expression unreadable. Scenario 3. Onboard triage during a ship-wide emergency. The room tensed. The students, still buzzing from their earlier success, now faced an even more complex challenge. Unlike the controlled environment of the earlier battlefield simulation, this scenario added a ticking clock and the chaos of multiple patients in critical condition. This isn't just about one life, Carter continued. In a triage situation, you're forced to make choices. Sometimes that means deciding who you can save, and who you can't. Every decision you make will weigh on you. The faces of those you couldn't help will stay with you, but so will the knowledge that you gave others a chance to live. The student's unease was palpable. Serox's frills fluttered in sharp bursts, a clear sign of her distress. Kvar's mandibles clicked rhythmically, a nervous habit Carter had come to recognize. Even Kvar, for all his strength and composure, seemed unsure of what lay ahead. Form teams of 3, Carter instructed. Each team will take on a section of the ship. Your job is to stabilize as many patients as possible before the hull breach countdown expires. You have 15 minutes? The students scrambled into groups, their movements a mix of urgency and uncertainty. Serox's frills trembled visibly, her anxiety evident as she glanced nervously at her assigned teammates. Kvar moved with a steady, almost mechanical precision, his mandibles clicking as he assessed the situation. Beside them, the Evrexian ruffled their vibrant feathers, chirping softly to calm themselves before diving into the task. Around the room, similar scenes played out as bioluminescent signals flashed and feathers flared, each group grappling with their own mix of doubt and determination. Serox and Kvar paired with the Evrexian, their earlier experiences together forging a tentative bond. Around them, other teams formed with a flurry of bioluminescent signals and chirping communications. As the simulation began, chaos erupted. The holographic ship's corridors flickered with sparks and debris, and holographic patients, some humanoid, others distinctly alien, lay sprawled across the ground. Each one had a different set of injuries, and their vital signs blinked ominously on a floating HUD above their bodies. Team 1, report, Carter called out, monitoring their progress from the control station. Serox's voice crackled over the comms, shaky but determined. We've stabilized one patient, applying Quickseal foam to a thoracic wound. Kvar is assisting with a collapsed airway. In the simulated corridor, Kvar knelt beside an alien patient, his massive hands deftly maneuvering the auto-injector to administer an airway stabilizer. The Evrexian hovered nearby, their feathers ruffled as they scanned the patient's vitals, chirping status updates to the team. The pace was relentless. Every minute brought new challenges, a critical bleed here, a failing heart there. The students worked frantically, juggling their limited tools and the ever-ticking countdown. Across the room, other teams faced similar struggles. The symphony of their efforts filled the air with a cacophony of commands, status updates, and the hum of medical devices. Halfway through the simulation, Carter introduced an unexpected twist. The ship groaned under the force of a simulated direct hit, throwing several students off balance as the floor beneath them trembled violently. Sparks burst from a nearby console, and a wave of disorienting vibrations rippled through the holographic corridors. Several patients' vital signs blinked red in unison, their conditions deteriorating rapidly as Carter's calm voice broke through the chaos. The ship lurched violently, simulating a direct hit. The lights flickered, and several patients' conditions worsened simultaneously. "This is what happens when you're caught off guard," Carter said into her comms. "Adapt. Improvise. Keep moving." In Serox's team, the Evrexian chirped in alarm. Vitals dropping on patient 3. Severe internal bleeding. Kvar growled low in his throat, his mandibles flaring. "I'll handle it." Serox moved to patient 4. Serox hesitated for a moment, her frills twitching, but she nodded and shifted focus. Her delicate appendages worked swiftly to administer an adrenaline shot to stabilize the next patient. Meanwhile, Kvar tackled the bleeding alien, using a combination of human-inspired techniques and his own species' brute strength to compress the wound and slow the bleeding. With the countdown ticking into its final minutes, the students pushed harder, their initial fear giving way to a kind of frantic determination. Carter watched closely, her expression a mix of pride and stern focus. She noted the way the teams began to communicate more fluidly, their earlier hesitations melting under the pressure of shared purpose. As the final seconds ticked away, the holographic display froze, and the simulation ended. The room fell silent, save for the students' heavy breathing. Carter stepped forward, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You saved 15 lives," she announced. "But you lost 5. The weight of those numbers hung in the air. Serox's frills drooped, and the Evrexian's feathers flattened against their body. Even Kvar, usually stoic, lowered his gaze. "This is the reality of triage," Carter said, her tone steady but not unkind. "You will never save everyone. But every life you do save matters. Never lose sight of that." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "And remember, this was a simulation. Out there the stakes are higher. The conditions are harsher. But you showed something today that can't be taught in a textbook. Heart. You kept going even when it seemed impossible. That's what makes the difference." Serox stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "What if we had more time? Could we have saved them all?" Carter's gaze softened. "Maybe. Maybe not. Time is the one resource you'll never have enough of. That's why we train. To make the most of every second." The students nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and quiet resolve. Carter dismissed them shortly after, but as they filed out, their murmured conversations told her they wouldn't forget this lesson anytime soon. Serox spoke softly to Kvar, her frills still trembling. "If we'd had one more minute, patient 3 might have made it." Kvar nodded, his mandibles clicking in thought. "We'll be faster next time." Nearby, the Evrexian chirped a hopeful note. "We saved 15. That's 15 futures still possible." Carter watched them, their words carrying a mix of regret and quiet determination that signaled they were beginning to understand the weight and value of each decision. For Serox, Kvar, and the others, this was more than a class. It was a glimpse into what it truly meant to face the impossible and keep fighting. The next day, the lecture hall was quieter than usual. The students filed in slowly, their bioluminescent patches dim, their movements subdued. The gravity of yesterday's simulation still lingered in the air. Even Kvar, who often exuded stoic confidence, looked uncharacteristically pensive as he took his seat. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Carter stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped behind her back. She let the silence hang for a moment before addressing the class. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Yesterday you faced one of the hardest lessons you'll ever learn as a medic. You saved lives, but you also learned what it means to lose them. That's not something that gets easier. And it shouldn't." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing down on the students. Serox's frills drooped further, while the Evrexian beside her chirped softly, a faint note of shared resolve. Carter continued, "Today we're going to build on that lesson. But this time the stakes are even higher. You won't just be saving individuals. You'll be working together to save an entire colony." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Serox's frills stiffened, and Kvar's mandibles clicked twice in a sharp, rhythmic pattern. The Evrexian's feathers ruffled nervously. Carter gestured to the holographic display as it flickered to life, revealing a sprawling colony under siege. Smoke billowed from damaged buildings, and the faint cries of the wounded echoed through the speakers. The display zoomed in on a central medical facility, overwhelmed with injured colonists. "This is your scenario," Carter said. "The colony has been hit by a meteor storm, followed by a catastrophic infrastructure collapse. The local medics are overwhelmed, and you are their only backup. Your goal is to stabilize as many injured colonists as possible and evacuate them to safety before the colony's environmental systems fail." The students sat frozen, the enormity of the task sinking in. Carter's voice broke through their hesitation. "This is not about perfection. It's about action. Do what you can with what you have. And remember, every second counts." The simulation began with a sudden jolt. The room filled with the chaotic sounds of alarms, crumbling structures, and distant screams. The students snapped into action, their earlier hesitation replaced by the muscle memory they had honed in previous exercises. Serox, Kvar, and the Avrexian quickly formed a team again, their bond now strengthened by shared experience. They moved as a cohesive unit, each member seamlessly taking on tasks that matched their strengths. Serox's delicate appendages were perfect for precise sutures and injections, while Kvar's immense strength allowed him to clear debris and carry injured colonists to safety. The Avrexian provided crucial support, their sharp eyes scanning for hidden dangers and their quick reflexes patching environmental breaches before they could worsen. Across the room, other teams worked with equal fervor. Carter watched closely, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She saw the moments of brilliance, a student improvising an air filter for a choking colonist, another using a collapsed beam as a makeshift stretcher. But she also saw the moments of failure, hesitation costing precious seconds, a misjudged diagnosis leading to a lost life. She made mental notes, ready to offer feedback when the exercise ended. Midway through the simulation, a new challenge emerged. A simulated aftershock rocked the colony, sending debris cascading down corridors and cutting off access to key areas. One of the holographic colonists cried out from behind a collapsed wall, their vitals blinking red on the display. Serox's team was closest. She hesitated, her frills trembling. "We'll never clear that in time," she said, her voice tinged with despair. Kvar stepped forward, his deep voice steady. "Then we'll make time." He knelt and began clearing the debris with methodical precision, his strength turning what seemed impossible into a rapidly shrinking obstacle. The Avrexian chirped encouragement, darting forward to stabilize the injured colonist as soon as the path was clear. Serox followed, her earlier hesitation replaced by focused determination. Together they managed to save the colonist, their teamwork a testament to their growth. As the simulation timer reached its final moments, Carter called for a halt. The holographic chaos froze, and silence descended on the room once more. The students stood amidst the frozen display, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and pride. Carter stepped forward, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. "Today you saved an entire colony. But it came at a cost. You lost 27 colonists. 27 lives that could not be saved." The weight of the number settled over the students. Some hung their heads, others exchanged quiet murmurs. Serox's frills drooped and Kvar's mandibles clicked softly in contemplation. "This is the reality of what we do," Carter said. "You will always wish you could have done more. But you did something remarkable today. You worked together. You adapted. You made the impossible possible. And that is what makes you medics. That is what makes you heroes." Her words resonated deeply, and for a moment the student stood a little taller. Even Serox's frills lifted slightly, a spark of pride visible in her stance. Carter's gaze swept over the class, her expression softening. "I won't tell you it gets easier. But I will tell you this, every life you save matters. And every loss teaches you how to save more in the future." As the students filed out, their movements carried a new weight. This time it wasn't the weight of despair but of responsibility. Serox, Kvar, and the Avrexian lingered at the door, exchanging quiet words of encouragement before stepping into the corridor. Carter remained behind, staring at the frozen simulation. Slowly she reset the controls, watching as the chaotic scene faded into a blank slate. She let out a slow breath, her hand lingering on the console. "They'll be ready," she murmured to herself. "When the time comes they'll be ready."